remember exactly how old I was when I first realized that my church was, well, no. I always knew that we were the true Catholics. We were the Catholics. We were Catholic. And the other church in town was that they were Roman Catholic. And that distinction, you know, within, I mean, the way I was raised, that meant that we were maintaining the true apostolic succession to, you know, St. Peter, more or less, and that we were the real Catholics, and that the schismatics was the entire institution of the Roman Catholic Church. But when I realized that was not the case, and that was sort of inverted, or when did I realize that I was part of a small group of schismatics? I don't know. In my teens, I guess. No, yeah, in my teens. And I was 15 when I basically walked away internally from the whole scene, with a sort of, you know, because I did pray, I suppose, although it was never, I mean, I said the prayers in Latin and English that I was taught, and participated in the Mass, and, you know, would usually say my penances after going to confession. Maybe I should tell more about what, but I walked away. I remember where I was standing and what I thought to myself at the time. I was walking past the Methodist church, just coincidence, it was on the corner of my block, and I was walking, thinking, and I remember just telling God I'd be back. Like I have to do some things right now, but I'll be back. And I think I knew even when I was saying it that I wasn't going to be back. I was like, I was telling God I was going out for cigarettes, and yeah, I never went back. But who knows? I'm still alive, and I mean, I don't know. I still believe some things. Not those things though. But so what were the qualities of I mean, Saint Joseph's Monastery was the name of the church. It was where Chester Olszewski, who had been an Episcopalian priest, maybe some higher level prelate, but Chester Olszewski called himself Peter II, the last pope. He claimed to have been ordained by Christ and the Virgin. There was a woman named Anne Poor who was my father's neighbor, and she was the way my father was brought in. My father was a part of the miracle occurring at Anne Poor's house before Chester Olszewski even came around. My father was sort of a follower, and maybe confidant. Maybe Anne Poor spoke to my dad, and they had a relationship of some kind. But Anne Poor had a statue of Christ with bleeding hands, and may have been bleeding elsewhere. And there was, I believe, a statue of the Virgin that was weeping on her property, or small property, like a little row home, more or less, in Chichester, in like Lower Chichester, I think. I'm remembering this right. I'm not sure. There was an article in the newspaper, the local newspaper, about it. My father saw and went to go visit her. And you know, there are other articles you can dig up about this, because this Episcopalian priest, Chester, met her and then brought the statue to his church in the town I grew up in, Eddystone. I think it was called St. Luke's. And he converted from Episcopalianism to Catholicism, because through visions, I believe, Anne Poor, and he had visions as well, I believe, you know, revealed that Christ had ordained him the last pope, and that John Paul II was an anti-pope, and that there hadn't been a proper pope since John the 23rd or something. I'm not sure all the details. It's nonsense to me now in a way. But you know, I think my pops had a lot of faith and needed somewhere to put it, and had faith in Ampor, who to me, when I grew up in this group, we went to church on Sunday. It was just like going to church on Sunday. Our family paid a tithe. We put money in the basket, sacraments, Holy Communion, confession. I was confirmed pretty young compared to other Catholics. I was like 7 years old maybe, and I didn't know what was going on in my confirmation. But anyway, Ann Poor dressed as a Carmelite nun, more or less, and called herself Sister Della Maria Consolata, and she lived at the monastery with Chester and Bob Hoyt, who was Father Peter. Oddly, they were both named Peter. They both took the name Peter, because the Holy Father, as I called him, Chester, took the name Peter II. But he also called himself Chrysikiel Elias, and there was some other like magical wizard type shit going on. And the chapel was a large home in Eddystone, probably one of the nicer homes in Eddystone, attached to a small shop that they, opened as a thrift shop to make some extra money. People donated to the thrift shop, and yeah, it was actually quite a charming building and a charming little setup they had there. But it was all made up. It was all just a recreation from the charisma of Ann Poor and Chester Olszewski to but whatever, that's what the Catholic Church is for a lot of people. You pay $20 in the basket to get a story every Sunday, and our story was bitchin'. It was rad. We were the only ones with the truth. We were the true Catholics. It gives you a sense of importance, which is healthy or not. I think it helps sometimes to have a sense of being on a mission, being devoted to something higher. I did think a lot about God and about ethics as a kid, and I think I got to avoid some of the worst aspects of the proper Catholic Church. Chester never touched me or anything like that. The church I grew up in was actually sexually safe place. It was a little odd to have to in confession when I started masturbating to have to talk about abusing myself to this old guy Bob Hoyt, who wasn't a priest. It was just a dude that had been ordained by Chester. My father almost took that path as well, apparently, and he lived as a Franciscan with these guys for a while. Apparently his name was Brother Andrew, and that's why I'm Andrew. Sort of a backdoor junior. That sounds weird, backdoor junior. But anyways, Chester, growing up, Ann Poor, to me, was just this sort of, I liked her. I had a good feeling from her. Sometimes she seemed pretty calm and tranquil, but I also knew that she had, she would get mad at you. I think I got yelled at by her a couple times. She smoked cigarettes, sitting in the kitchen, which was right between the chapel, and there was an upstairs I'd never saw, and the rectory and the thrift store. And the thrift store had a little basement as well, where there was merchandise on racks. It was 80s, 90s. Hard to describe to a person today. Here, my context now is not a small town with a church and a house with a thrift store. I don't even know if that's legal. So I don't know what they were doing, and the whole thing was religious charlatanry was happening. I was raised in a charlatan Catholic sect. I think it was referred to as the miracle by people. And secrets were revealed. There were notebooks. There were many, many sermons. Often they were fine. Chester was. It seemed pretty normal to me. It wasn't. They didn't want anything weird from us. Just to tithe like you would a normal church, and show up. It's a weird kind of gig if you have the charisma and the creativity, and if you can keep a straight face. There have been times when I thought maybe I should take up charlatanry, and maybe try to tell some people a story for a couple years and make them feel You know, they were part of something, but I couldn't keep a straight face, and I'd only want to do it if it would end up helping people. I don't think my ideas are good enough. My ideas are good enough for me, maybe, and they've maybe harmed other people, you know, because they're not for everyone to live like I do. It's not for everyone to live like I do. So, raised in the cults. Skipping a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a whole story to it. A guy online wrote a paper, Magnus something. My dad, I think, talked to him a little bit, and I've considered writing about it. Once I drove. So the whole sham fell apart when I was in my teens. Around when I left anyway. When I sort of stopped going to church. Chester fled. Well, Ann Poor had died. She died of, I think, leukemia, and he canonized her. There was like the canonization ceremony. There was a statue made of her that was then revealed under a shroud. It was revealed, and holy cards. You know, we could you have holy cards for the saints and stuff. Holy cards made of Sister Della Maria Consolata, Saint Della Maria Consolata. But then things started to unravel, I suppose. Maybe things weren't, where's this miracle going? So he skipped town. He found another nun in north central Pennsylvania with a water stain looking like the Virgin on the church wall. He's like, I'm skipping miracles. I'm jumping ship. But before he left, he had a tough conversation with my father. I don't know if he wanted us to move with him or what. I don't know what it was. He insisted my father burn all the photos he'd taken over, a couple decades more or less of documenting ceremonies and different events and things at the church. My father basically followed his instructions. I think he kept some photos. I have some photos. Not much, though. A lot was lost. Anyway, and then he told my dad that it had all been a lie, and that during this thing in the past, when he'd smashed the statue wrapped in some fabric, later he'd looked inside, and they took the hands off of it too. It's a long story, but he said that there were tubes inside of the statue to pump out blood. And so Ann Poor also had stigmata. I grew up with this woman wearing gloves to hide her stigmata, and wounds in her side, and I think sometimes she had a crown of thorns wounds and stigmata in her feet as well. Apparently, and blood was a part. There was a blood-stained host that never did seem to mold or rot or anything. No, preservatives. And then a blood-stained paten, which is a piece of fabric that goes over a chalice, I believe, that had some of Christ's handwriting on it, and other relics and things. There were I grew up with this imagery that I don't usually talk about. But anyway, what was I talking about? Ann Poor died, and Chester told my dad it was all a sham, and that God had told him that Ann Poor was the evil one who was twisting things and perverting things, and everything Ann Poor had ever said was out the window now. And my dad, the reason he was there originally was Ann Poor. He had a lot of faith in this woman. And I kind of can see, that's what I was also trying to say. I can kind of see why. She was a striking character in a way, even though I was a kid and she was just sort of grumpy sometimes. Yeah, I had a certain feeling for her. Maybe that's because they made a statue of her and all this stuff. I don't know. Okay, so Chester skipped town, got himself a new nun, and then years and years later, I drove up there to talk to him. I just wanted to get some of this. I was thinking about writing about it, maybe. In a more objective way, not just from my point of view growing up in it, but what is this? Find the newspaper articles and interview people who are still alive. I've talked to my dad at length, and we've written back and forth about it, some of his recollections, but it's weird to be so close to it, but nobody else is going to write a book. So anyway, I went to interview Chester, and I brought a little recorder, and I don't know if it's legal, please don't arrest me, but I had the recorder in my pocket, and I recorded our conversation without him knowing. I knew he wouldn't I knew he wouldn't say yes, and when I wasn't going to publish, never was going to publish the sound, but I wanted to listen back. I wanted to remember things he was telling me anyway. I wasn't going to share them with anyone except in writing. I wasn't going to share his voice. But we talked for 5 hours, and he told me the whole story from his point of view at his age and what he could recollect. But that whole experience of going up to see him was really weird. It was winter. I was driving this Saturn that I bought from my buddy Vince. I drove a Saturn. I don't know why that's part of it. But through the winter, Pennsylvania winter, the central Pennsylvania winter, to this town called Bradford, where Zippo lighters are made, and it was where the first oil oil boom was in Pennsylvania. Anyway, Bradford, Pennsylvania. There was a church there. I found it, and I was trying to get there for mass. I wanted to see what he was up to, you know, and I missed mass, but they were having dinner, having like a lunch in the basement of this church, or the lower level, which was ground level. And I knocked on the door, it was like a little screen door, and they opened it, and I was like, "Hi, I know uh, the Holy Father, or you know, I know Chester Olszewski," and they're like, "Oh, okay, come on in." And he recognized me immediately. He looked like Santa Claus, a big white beard. He'd gotten rounder, but he was still this very charismatic, sort of like bear-like man who just gave you like a sort of good, happy feeling. Maybe it's because he just has a kind of charisma. It's hard to explain. Uh, but he came over to me and immediately put his arm around me and walked me away from them a little bit and was just like, "Don't tell them I was married." Under his breath, "Don't tell them I was married." And I was like, "All right, bud, I'm not going to tell anybody you were married," because he was Episcopalian when he started, and his wife came, you know, was a part of our parish. I don't know, you know, there are implications that I really haven't explored as an adult to what was going on. The newspaper article about him and Ann Poor talks about them kissing and passing a communion host back and forth. I don't remember. There was nothing like that in the church growing up as the first baby baptized in this thing. But I don't know what kind of freaky shit they were up to, you know, behind closed doors. But he said, "Don't tell them I was married to his wife, Lynn, who is a friend of my mother's. Like, you know, I think she passed away recently. Or maybe not so recently. But anyway, I went and interviewed him, and then later that tape, or that recorder, was stolen, so it's gone now. One of the things lost. And that's all I want to say right now. Sorry, I just decided to ramble a bit about being raised in a schismatic Catholic mystical sect, and when I kind of realized that. I was in my early teens, I realized, like, oh, our prayers are not the same as the prayers they say. Chester and Della Maria Consolata are making this stuff up. You know, like, we do the sign of the cross differently. He makes these vestments that are a little different. Like, it was a very rich aesthetic environment, to be honest. Always these flowers, and the chapel itself had the Stations of the Cross, and like the confessional had this. It was just like artisans had come. He had brought people in to make the place a church, and it was a beautiful little church inside, for sure. And the incense that they burned, and a nice big censer, and there were these Eastern Orthodox elements that he brought into, because he's like Polish from Buffalo originally. So it was an interesting aesthetic experience to grow up in this group, and to grow up thinking that you were a part of a small group of people who had the truth. And it was a weird truth. It was like mysterious, and old, and yeah, and secret.